Welcome to Talkback, brought to you by our newest sponsor, Spray Green Lawn. Provides lawn aeration services, fertilization, and weed control to make the grass grow thick. Give them a call at 207-9273. Mention this message. Get 15% off your first application. Also brought to you by the Mustard Seed Asian Cafe at Southgate Mall, Kootenai Creek Village, the maintenance-free active adult community in Stevensville. Dig It Excavating. They bring 30 years of excavation excellence to every job. Transport Equipment, your headquarters for RV service maintenance and repair. And by Bulls Eyewear, they have some of the lowest prices in town on contact lenses. See Lynette at 2910 South Reserve. Growing ever more popular. Talkback. Hey, Bob Seidenschwartz, how are you, sir?
Good morning, Peter and John, and welcome to our guest, Mark Kent, who is on the phone calling from, I believe, Washington, D.C.
Certainly is. Mark, welcome to Montana, and welcome to Talkback, sir.
Well, good morning, and thank you very much for having me.
It's our pleasure.
Would you please do the honors of introducing Mark and a little bit of his background there, Peter? And
Certainly
then
will.
We'll get right to it.
All right. Mark arrived in Washington in August of 2013 to lead the Trade and Agriculture team at the British Embassy in Washington. He works on trade policy, regulatory issues, and agriculture, but his focus is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP. Mark is a career diplomat, having joined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in 2003. He recently worked on strategic finance in the FCO in London. He was previously seconded to the Cabinet Office as assistant to the UK's G8 Sherpa, a role known as a YAC, supporting the Sherpa and Prime Minister in the G8 summits in Canada in 2010 and France in 2011. He was posted to Tokyo between 2005 and 2009, focused on economic issues. Mark gained a BA in economics from Queen's College, Cambridge University. I think I've heard of that place.
Yes.
So, Mark, welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
So, Mark, I want to start this conversation off. I want the audience to understand the importance. This is where the relationship of Montana World Affairs Council and Western Montana and Montana have come into play, because we've hosted Priya Gupta, who's a consul general out of San Francisco, several times, both on the show and here in person. She is going to be moving on in terms of her post. So they're going to have a new consul general in San Francisco, I believe, by July. But we started this discussion and have developed a very good relationship with the British consul out of San Francisco. And this is a furthering of that with TTIP discussions, which are important both to United States and Montanans and, of course, our European friends and allies. So we have Mark here today to give us an overview of what TTIP is about, how it will affect us, what are some of the pros and cons, and some of the challenges that we face. And we're making a difference right here in Montana, because this discussion involves you, the audience, but also we will be having further discussions with our public officials, Steve Daines, Tester, and Zinke, because we've been asked to try to help educate and provide insight into what this is about. So we're doing something very important in terms of public service right here.
Mark, I have one big initial question, and I think it's a question lots of people in their cars have today too. We hear a lot about these acronyms, these trade deals that are going on, TTP, TPA, right. TTIP. What is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership exactly?
Well, I'm glad you asked. We struggle with the acronyms as well, and we need to make sure we remember them. So the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP, is a trade agreement that is under negotiation at the moment. It is a negotiation between the United States and the 28 member countries of the European Union, and we negotiate as a single entity. So the European Commission negotiates on behalf of our 28 countries. And like any trade agreement, it covers a really quite diverse and vast array of specific issues. But ultimately, it seeks to create new trading opportunities, it seeks to set standards, and it seeks to basically generate additional transatlantic trade and investment.
What new opportunities are there? People think we've been trading with the European Union for quite a long time. Things have been pretty chummy between our countries. After that World War II thing, we've been pretty well off. What opportunities are missing?
Well, it's worth mentioning that existing relationship, because in a way that's what makes this such an exciting opportunity. I mean, just to take the number of people employed on both sides of the Atlantic by European and American firms, we have about 13 million employed in total through the trade and investment relationship. The United Kingdom is the biggest foreign investor in the United States, bar none. The United States is the biggest investor in my country, the United Kingdom, by none. So there's already an incredibly deep, effective trading and investment relationship. But there's still some things which perhaps we take for granted today, but we are still frictions in that trading relationship. You know, to take a few examples, there are still tariffs on quite a number of the goods that are traded back and forth. And some of those tariffs are quite small. They can be 1%, 2% here and there. But when you're competing globally, that's meaningful. And that's a cost and a friction that ultimately gets passed on to us all as consumers that we're paying for. So we think it's worth having a look at those and seeing what we can do to eliminate as many as possible of those frictions and barriers.
So Mark, when you're talking about tariffs, there will be winners and losers with that. So is this a pact that would eliminate tariffs in its entirety, or would it streamline some of the tariffs? Because there would be obviously advantages from British agriculture or disadvantages and vice versa. So what would this attempt to do?
Well, just on the tariff side, and there's three parts of this agreement, and perhaps I'll touch upon all of those as we're talking. The first part is sort of market access, is kind of getting goods and services into the other market, and within that we think about tariffs. But the other two, and we'll come back to them, are setting some of the rules and then thinking about regulatory coherence or regulatory convergence and what issues in regulation, and that's quite an exciting part of these talks. But on tariffs, I mean, the average tariffs, I think, are sort of about 3% in the United States and slightly higher in the European Union, but that's spread out across a number of products. I mean, to take some examples, in the automotive sector, for example, if you're trying to export a vehicle to the EU at the moment, you face a tariff of about 10%. If you're trying to export a vehicle to the US at the moment, you face a tariff of approximately 2%, depending on the car. So those are across huge areas of the products. There are different tariffs. About half of the trade is already tariff-free, but there's still quite a lot of tariffs, and those can be hugely complicated. I mean, you mentioned agriculture, Bob. I mean, just looking at some of the way tariffs are calculated in the agricultural space, it's hugely, hugely complicated based on weight and things like that. But those are meaningful barriers. Now, what will TTIP get to at the end? Ultimately, we don't know yet. It's a negotiation. But both sides have made absolutely clear they're committed to reducing or eliminating the overwhelming majority of those tariffs.
I have to know, do you guys have a tariff on tea? Just got to know.
I don't think we do.
Okay.
But, John's making a really bad joke here.
I actually have a quite a serious topic. When I was over in Great Britain visiting my daughter, I had a chance to sample something that everybody drinks over there called Iron Brew. Okay,
what is it?
It's kind of a soft drink, kind of an energy drink, and it is not allowed to be exported to the United States of America, which is kind of upsetting to me.
Why?
It's got some sort of ingredient that the FDA says, oh, no, you can't have that.
But Peter brings up a very important point that I want Mark to address, which is we all have different barriers to what we can import or export based on something that is difficult sometimes to describe. Will this agreement standardize things such as medicines, foods, where you have different standards versus us? So could you please answer that, Mark?
Well, I think there's one of the exciting areas of these talks is around regulation, and typically most trade agreements haven't advanced very far on talking about some of the sort of behind-the-border barriers that can affect the flow of goods and services. I mean, nobody in this trade agreement is looking to lower standards or do anything to jeopardize the health and safety of consumers. But sometimes there are differences. And I think where there are differences and where those differences prevent goods moving into another market, it is worth having a conversation about whether those are justified and about whether they're strictly necessary. And that goes in both directions, frankly. And through the course of these conversations, we'll be having a number of talks about specific rules. But to take medicines for one example, I don't think there's an effort to kind of standardize the approvals process. But what there is a conversation to say, well, we inspect the producers. Both sides look at the the plants that make these pharmaceuticals, and they're produced to very high standards. But do we need to do it twice? Does both sides need to go to a plant and check that they're producing to the same high standards? Can we rely, at least in part, on each other's work? And we have some of the best regulators in the world in the FDA and in the European Medicines Agency. So can we rely a little bit more on each other's work and perhaps focus those resources on areas which might be more high risk?
Sounds like a turf war. Well, we're up against a break, and Mark is on the line, wants to visit with Mr. Kent. We'll be right back with more of Talk Back. By the way, we have two lines open at 721-1290. The Montana World Affairs Council on the radio continues. Okay, we're back. This is Talk Back. I'm Peter Christian, John King over there, Bob Seidenschwartz joining us. We have Mark Kent from, he's in Washington, D.C., but he is the head of the British Trade and Agriculture. And let's get Mark on the line right now.
This Mark is probably not from Kent.
I'm thinking not.
Sadly not.
All right. Mark, you're on with Mark. Go ahead, please.
Kent. I'm originally from Seattle, and we got big shipping over there in Puget Sound. And my question is, hopefully in your trade agreement, between Europe and the U.S., you use either U.S. or European shippers, not let be underbid by smaller countries just because they're cheaper.
Well, I think ultimately it depends on the choices that people make and some of the issues that arise. Obviously, when you're exporting goods, you get to choose which shipping company you want to use, and there are some, and you'll know them well from your experience, some restrictions that actually we as the United Kingdom face in sort of shipping goods in the United States. They're well known, well established, and quite important domestically. We understand that. But I think there are choices about which ship that people provide. I think it's a relatively open market between us at the moment regarding ships. But it's certainly an important area. And I think one of the big opportunities from this is, what trade agreements you tend to find is that trade flows increase in both directions when you negotiate these deals. So actually, the volume of goods going back and forward can increase. And that's a huge opportunity to all shipping companies and organizations that are moving goods backwards and forwards. So whether you're moving small parcels or air freight or indeed large container ships, actually volumes of trade typically increase quite significantly. I mean, we had an agreement with Korea a few years ago. In the last 4 years of that, UK exports increased by about 50%. That's a huge increase, and obviously that benefits the companies that are moving those goods.
Allow me to ask you a quick question. Just as an ignoramus regular guy here in America who never really thinks about these trade agreements very much, why are they necessary? I mean, why not just have what we like to euphemistically call just free trade? Okay, I've got this, you want that, we'll trade here. Why are these agreements necessary?
Well, it's a really good question, and we've reached the point where we are with some of our trade rules through successive years of negotiations at the World Trade Organization. But our ability to make progress in a multilateral way, so with almost all countries in the world, has been challenging, I think it's fair to say, recently. But those rules that have created a degree of openness, and the United States and Europe are at the relatively open end of the spectrum. But there's still more we can do. I think the other reason, and I mentioned tariffs before, but the other reason to have these trade agreements is to try and set some of the rules about not only about just the tariff levels that are associated with products, but actually behind the border barriers, or to try and encourage everybody to enact rules and regulations in a way that doesn't discriminate against a foreign producer. And a hugely important part of this deal, and a part of I think our sort of trade negotiations more broadly, is around setting some of the rules and standards in line with values, which frankly, given our huge and long history, we share, to try and set those rules in a way that's consistent with those values. So trade agreements are not just about the tariffs on goods going back and forwards. They can be around trying to ensure high labor standards, high environmental standards, high public health and safety standards. And I think trade agreements are helpful in all of those areas. They don't do absolutely everything, but they're helpful in terms of setting those rules. And there are some areas of the world which don't conform to the high standards that we share. And so TTIP is an opportunity for us to set a gold standard for some of those rules, whether it's some areas of environmental, labor standards, trade facilitations, how customs processes work. If we can set really high standards, then there's an opportunity for other countries to aspire to those in future.
I have a question about those standards, actually. One of the things people in the agricultural community are a little worried about are some of the standards that European Union sets on the requirements for fruits, vegetables. For example, it's my understanding European Union is much more stringent on genetically modified organisms. But other things, including the shape of certain vegetables and the coloring of the vegetables, is even more stringently regulated. Will those affect our markets if we set this gold standard?
I'll tell you what, Mark, hang on to that answer because we're up against a break. I want to give you plenty of time to make your comment. Also, Mike is on the line, and Mark Kent is going to be with us all the way until 10 o'clock this morning. So if you have a question or a comment, give us a call at 721-1290. Talk back, rolling right along. The Montana World Affairs Council on the radio, joining us on the phone from Washington, Mark Kent, who was a British head of trade and agriculture, talking about trade agreements. Now, you just asked a quick question, John.
A lot of American producers, from my experience, are a little worried about standardizing things with Europe because of some more stringent regulations when it comes to the types of food that can be grown and even the types of food that can be sold in the marketplace. And I was hoping you could respond to that.
I can, and it's worth mentioning agriculture is a hugely important part of both our respective economies. I know it is in Montana particularly. I'll mention, it's just worth bearing, wheat imports from the EU. We're a huge consumer of wheat in the EU, and about 11% of our wheat imports come from the United States. And about half our durum wheat, which I think goes into pasta, comes from the United States. So there's a huge market already for U.S. wheat. I don't know how much comes from Montana, if any, but it's a significant market already. But already there are restrictions on that, quantitative restrictions and tariff restrictions on that. So it's entirely possible that in this agreement some of those restrictions could be alleviated or improved, creating new opportunities for Montana farmers. But on the point about rules, I think we've been clear that TTIP is not a vehicle to lower our food safety standards or lower sort of our treatment for how we deal with these things as consumers. But there are important conversations to be had about whether there are unnecessary duplications or restrictions in the process of moving things across. And you mentioned GMOs, and I think it's an important area. And there are two debates in Europe, one about growing things domestically, but also about imports. And a large proportion of our imports for feed, particularly for animal feed, soybeans is a good example, are approved. We approve GMOs. There are a number of GM approvals that have already taken place. There's a specific framework for how we do that, and that's not going to change. But that approval process does already allow GM products from the United States to enter the EU.
Okay, let's get Mike on the line. Mike, you're on with Mark Kent. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. To build on John's point a little bit, your guest talks about the different rules in place through the EU. What happens to the treaty or any agreements if there's a Grexit, where there's a vote to exit the European Union by the British?
Has that been factored in, Mark?
Well, it's a really important question, and as you may know, we have a vote on the 23rd of next month, 23rd of June, where the British people will decide whether they want to remain part of the European Union or not. And our trading relationship is a fundamental part of that question. I mean, the British government's view, and we're telling people here as well, is we believe we're stronger, safer, and better off in a reformed European Union. That's the government position. That's what the Prime Minister is being extremely active and vocal campaigning to secure at the moment. And that's the outcome that we're planning for. But ultimately, if we were to choose to leave, I think our participation in this agreement obviously is no longer guaranteed. We would not be part of it. So there's, I think, a huge, the trading relationship and the access to the the European Union's free trade agreements with a whole range of countries around the world, including this one negotiation, is a huge part of why we're making the case to remain in the EU.
Now, has that been made clear to the population that leaving the EU would drastically affect the trade with basically everyone who lives and works in Great Britain?
It's absolutely a point that we're making clear. The Prime Minister is touring the country. He's making the case with business leaders. He's explaining to the British people. I mean, even before TTIP were to happen, our Treasury has done some analysis which suggests that the impact on the average household could be in the region of £4,300 per year per household, which is about $6,000-7,000 per year, a hit to their income if we were to leave.
Okay,
and
now,
that's before
with that, Mark,
TTIP.
I'm so sorry. We're up against our hard break for the top of the hour, so hang on. We'll get back to that answer after the top of the hour. We'll be right back. And Jack, I'd like to ask you to hang on as well. We will be back. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back. It is the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio for at least the next few minutes, right, Bob?
Right. So, Mark, welcome back. So, with the brief couple of moments we have, could you please give what message do you want to deliver to the citizens here in Montana in terms of what this pact may be in terms of impact, opportunity, and challenges, please?
Well, I'd invite all of your listeners to keep an open mind as the negotiations go forward. It's not concluded yet, but we're hoping to make as much progress as we can this year and hopefully conclude negotiations this year. So as the debates on trade and other issues go forward, please keep an open mind and think what it might mean for you specifically. We commissioned a little bit of research looking at the state-by-state potential impact of TTIP on different states. And we concluded a page on Montana specifically, and it made an estimate. It's not certain, sadly, but it's an estimate of the economic impact for Montana, and it suggested that exports to the EU could increase by about 20%, just under, so 19% or so. And it suggested that it also could boost net employment in Montana by a little over 2,000 jobs. So those numbers aren't guaranteed. But I think it's an important estimate based on rigorous economic modeling to suggest what kind of impact this agreement could have.
And what would be the economic impact of that? Obviously, increase in trade, increase in jobs, those are beneficial things. What would that change for Montana's GDP?
I don't know for the GDP specifically, I'm afraid, but certainly for exports, we'd expect increased exports to feed into GDP. We'd expect any additional income that consumers have if goods are slightly cheaper to go into buying more goods and services around Montana, and that could raise GDP. So we don't have a firm figure for that. But we do think that it's a significant opportunity, and it takes place across a range of product sectors. And ultimately, this is about having a bit more choice and taking away some of the barriers to trade and investment in both directions. Because
Montana is such an agricultural-heavy state with lots of natural resources to export as well, do we benefit better than many other states? You said you did one of these for almost all the states.
Well, it varies by state, and obviously where there are the stronger trade relationships already, some of the sort of slightly bigger impact takes place there. So I don't have every state in front of me, but I think it's meaningful, and I think it's important. Our analysis of state by state is on our website, so please Google TTIP in the 50 states, and you'll be able to look at specific ones. But even for the United States as a whole, the estimate, the economic model suggested that it could add about 740,000 jobs in total to the United States, and add about $80 to $100 billion to GDP overall. So those are meaningful gains. It doesn't incorporate every part of these agreements. Some things are hard to model, but I think it's an important data point as we think about this agreement going forward.
Now, Mark, is one of the challenges is getting our natural resources and our goods and services, because we're right smack dab in the middle, the northwest part of America, is one of the problems actually getting our goods and services to you.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure our trade agreement will move Montana anytime soon. But I think there's an opportunity from this agreement to look at new business opportunities. Maybe there will be opportunities there. I know the Great Lakes isn't that far away, so that's an important trading route
it's
to
a
Europe.
bit of a hoof, Mark.
It is all downhill from here. We could probably just put things on the hills and roll them.
Mark,
That's
I want to
right.
ask you, we've got a caller here, but I want to ask you too. One of the intangibles that I see is, familiarity breeds both content and opportunity. And having these agreements in place really exposes both British goods and U.S. goods to each other so that if we continue to be competitive, show others what we do best, really this agreement in theory opens up those opportunities, which then have multiple other intangible benefits as far as tourism, exchange, and various things that come about when we look at a product that we say we wish to buy or sell, correct?
Absolutely correct. And, tourism is a key part of the Montana economy, I know. And there's a huge number of British tourists coming backwards and forwards to the United States every year, a huge number of European tourists, and a huge number of Americans coming to our shores, and we're delighted to have them. But those visits expose people to goods and services which they might be keen to acquire back home, and actually there are some restrictions on those. So we think TTIP is a great opportunity for people who experience particular products in the United States when they visit to be able to get those more easily when they return home, and vice versa.
The one thing I did bring back from Great Britain was the wonderful term "mind the gap." so let's get John on the line. John, you have a question for Mark Kent. Hi.
Hi, Mr. Kent. Yes, I don't understand if you're on a Montana program why you don't have Montana's breakdown for trade potential in front of you.
Well, he did give us the increased trade percentages.
So thank you for your question. I mean, I think I've had a look at some of the current trade that Montana has, and the UK is the 12th largest export market. Montana exported about $24 million to the UK last year. And if you add together Montana's exports, not just to the UK, but to the other European Union countries, the EU becomes, I think, the third largest export market for Montana's exports. So it's already an important source of Montana's products. And we think, the analysis that we helped finance suggests that there could be a boost to that of around 20% if an ambitious agreement is concluded. But there's no guarantee that this is concluded, and so we're making the case to the good people of Montana and around the country as to why we hope that you can look at it with an open mind, and as negotiations move forward, find opportunities and business opportunities through this agreement. And we think it's a huge opportunity here.
Okay.
And we're keen to push forward with it.
I can open-mindedly see the positive potential for any kind of trade. However, we're in the United States. It's our standards that ought to be exported, not international standards being imported, because we have high standards in the United States. And I see this switch over to international standards and international laws, and I don't see how they really benefit us because we don't have any kind of direct control over foreign imports with regard to food as it is, because they use fertilizer that we do not.
Okay, thanks for the call. So how do you respond to that, Mark?
Well, thanks. It's an important point, and I think how we shape the rules is ultimately a really key part of trade agreements and about international sort of discourse more broadly. I mean, I think the United Kingdom, Europe, and the United States have a shared ambition to help set the rules, to set high standards around the world, and to set those consistent with values that we share. And of course, I absolutely agree that there are high standards in the United States for product safety, environmental safety, and things like that. I mean, I bought a car here, and I was perfectly happy to do so and to drive it around. I eat American food every day, so there is a really important set of standards here. But I think it's through these agreements that we can set that gold standard. And hopefully seek to set that as a standard that other countries around the world can hope to meet as well, and thereby drive up standards around the world, which is a shared objective that we both had. And this agreement is part of the process of moving us towards that.
So, Mark, out of respect for your time, because we could string you out here longer, but we had an agreement, and we must honor that, as we will the pact if it passes. So any final words that you would wish to share with Montana?
Well, I just say, thank you very much for taking the interest in this agreement. Thank you very much for having me on. I would encourage people to keep an eye on the negotiations, to talk about it. Debate and discussion is a really important thing, but ultimately to think about the opportunities that this agreement can bring, not only for the businesses that currently exist, but also new opportunities, new businesses, and new potential. A key statistic I hear very often is that 95% of consumers around the world are outside the United States. Well, 500 million of those are in the EU, and TTIP is an opportunity to reach those in a far better way than can be done at the moment.
And Mark, as I mentioned to you yesterday, the Montana World Affairs Council received a grant from the EU, and we'll be doing a program in September on TTIP. And I truly hope, as part of that program, that you personally and some of your staff may come to Montana to have further discussions with the citizens of this state.
Not a good idea, Bob, because once he gets here, he'll never want to leave.
Well, we will welcome with open arms, but should that opportunity arise, just want to let the public know that is coming up to further education and dialogue about what this issue is about.
The Redcoats are coming.
Mark, it's a pleasure.
Wonderfully kind invitation. Thank you very, very much.
All right, take care. Thank you, Mark.
Goodbye now.
All right, bye-bye. The Redcoats are coming. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. We're way overdue, and so stay with us. More of Talkback is on the way. Hey, we're back on Talkback, 721-1290. Unfortunately, Mr. Kent could not stay with us. He had to go, but let's get John on the line. John, go ahead, sir. Hello, John. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm here. I just ran into a room where there was a radio, so I'm running back.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yes. I just failed to mention that we're already under heavy regulation in our own country, so it seems sort of antithetical to accept further regulation outside of our country toward trade, because we're having a difficulty in trade of our own resources in Montana.
John, this is Bob. I had the opportunity to go back to Washington in March at the invitation of the British Embassy, and it was for the purposes of this very discussion and to the questions that are being raised here, so that Montanans can have this discussion and debate. And that's one of the challenges of an agreement like this. Will it add more burden already to an overly regulated type of environment that many of us feel already exists? And what I did learn is this is just a framework, a beginning. There will be a continual evolution of legal challenges and issues regarding these regulations. So once established, not necessarily written in stone. So it is going to be a long process. It will take a period of years and will evolve and morph in different ways.
Well, communication is great. One other thing, what is it? What kind of things are we exporting right now out of the country?
Oh, Montana?
Yes.
Oh, we do a lot of our agricultural products, of course.
Right.
Of course, we also export coal, but not necessarily to the EU.
That's going to the Pacific Rim area.
Right. We export. One of the things that we do a lot of exporting of is grain. That's the main export for EU. But we also export a lot of. Oh man, I can't remember what it's called. It's not sorghum, but it's like beans and a.
Let's just call it legumes.
It's not legumes, though.
No,
it's a little bit broader.
Up in Flathead, they grow this.
It's actually a rotation crop for grain, and we're growing a lot of it, and a lot of other countries are buying this stuff, and we just don't eat it here in the States.
Right.
I can't remember the name of it. I'll try to look it up.
Okay. And there's to a degree, you've got some biotech. There's a number of small firms that are working in conjunction in many cases with larger firms in the U.S. that are then exporting also out to the EU. So is Montana the largest trading partner of the EU? Of course not. He mentioned that from our economic perspective, it represents the 12th largest degree of export going to different countries. The one country that Montana exports the most to is
China.
No, South Korea.
South Korea.
Right. Yep, we've had guests before. So it's worthy of us as citizens to see where those markets are, because that's what you have to make as a decision as a business person in terms of where you direct your resources.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the call. All right, 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. A little bit of open phones going on here this morning. We're kind of lingering a little bit. Mr. Kent unable to stay with us because of his schedule. We appreciate the hour or so that he did spend with us this morning. So
we have a Facebook comment. This one's from Greg. He says, please inform your listeners about the big three that will soon ruin our lives, TTIP, TISA, and TPP. Now, I have to say, these trade deals, at least in the fervor of the election season, seem to be going the way of the dodo bird. Mm-hmm. On both sides, Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, and even Hillary Clinton, who used to be a pro-trade deal kind of gal, has at least eschewed that during the election cycle because it seemed to be the prominent or the more popular position to be against trade deals. What's your take on that? And yet, on the other hand, in Montana, it's my understanding that both Senator John Tester from the Democrats and Senator Gaines on the Republican side are both supporting the trade deals.
So my question to both of you in the audience, on balance, for what we know today at this moment, is open trade between nations a good thing or not? And of course, Mr. Trump has made the case that U.S. has lost jobs. Now, he's not wrong, but he's looking at certain industries. So on balance...
Is he being myopic?
Well, Mr. Trump knows better than this. He's a businessman that has properties and assets and is doing deals all over the world as we speak.
Right.
So he's reached out and he's reached an audience that has been affected by globalization, has been affected by reduction of certain products and services, i.e. coal. So there's no question there are some losers in this. But I have struggled with how do I come up with an answer to say to people who are at risk that somehow your job being lost is not a overall negative to the economy when your house and your way of life and your family and your community is being affected. And that's where I think we as a nation have been behind the curve.
That was Hillary Clinton's challenge, trying to talk to the coal mining communities.
Yeah, and she mucked that up.
Yeah, she did.
Something
it was
terrible.
horrible. I mean, she did a terrible job at it.
By the way, the crops that are usually used as rotation crops that I was mentioning earlier are the pulse crops.
Yes.
We don't eat a lot of pulse in Montana or in America in general, really, but we export a heck of a lot of it too. Especially India and other countries in Europe.
So we're up against a break. 721-1290 is our number. We can dive into open phones here, and if you'd like. And we're trying to get a hold of a representative from another organization to try to be on with us. We're working on that right now. Well, stay with us. We'll be right back. We're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, and Andy has been waiting very patiently. Andy, good morning. What's on your mind, sir?
Good morning. Down here in River Valley County, Judge Langton's facing Robert Myers for judge, and Robert Myers has had a couple ads on this station accusing Judge Langton of wrong conduct. And I was wondering if you guys know what the facts are. I was wondering if John has done any research on that to give us the facts in that case. I know that Robert Myers had been Valerie Stamey's lawyer. She was the treasurer.
Right. We remember.
Yeah, so he was kind of on her side on that whole thing. Of course, it was his job to defend her.
Yeah, I was going to say, just because a lawyer defends someone that did wrongdoing, it's kind of their job. No, I can't tell you anything about that case. I haven't dug into it enough to give a good opinion on that.
Could you do so?
Well, we could certainly.
I could try. You know what? The best way to do that would be to have them both on the air.
Yeah.
So I could try to arrange something like that. But their election's on the June 7th ballot, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So I honestly, I don't see it happening very likely.
And not only that, but thanks for your call, Andy. But by the way, a judicial election is nonpartisan.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those deals where they would just say, well, I think this is what I think this, and I'm just going to abide by the Constitution. I'm going to follow the law. I mean, that's. Yeah,
I was going to say talking to judicial candidates is really hard because they are. First of all, they're lawyers, so they're squirmy as heck to begin with. Second of all, they don't want to ever talk about upcoming cases or cases that they might be working on.
Right.
So the context that you might have to talk about it, they can't talk about. And third of all, they both refer every single time. They always refer to how they're going to protect and defend the Constitution. So it ends up kind of sounding samey.
Yes,
Yeah. All right, let's go to we have a special caller this time.
Yes, Kimberly Dudik is joining us. And Kim, I'm so glad that this opportunity arose because you are hosting and helping to host a very important conference coming up this holiday weekend at the University of Montana. Welcome to Talkback.
Kimberly, are you still on the line?
There you go. Kimberly, go ahead.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I got you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about what's coming up on Friday.
So Friday is the Stop Human Trafficking in Montana conference. It is a full day of events. We have 3 things planned. The first starts at 7:30. It's called the Red Sand Project, the Montana Red Sand Project. And it's part of a visual demonstration art where people are given a small packet of red sand to spread, and it's to raise awareness of human trafficking victims, and the sand signifies people falling through the cracks. And that will be at the University of Montana Oval at 7:30. All of these events are aimed at raising awareness of human trafficking and human trafficking victims and just the problem in our state. The next event is the big one, and that is an all-day conference at the University Center in the North Ballroom starting at 8:30. We'll have Senator John Tester there and Attorney General Tim Fox. They will be speaking at the beginning, and then it's a full day of hearing from the experts in this area, such as Detective Guy Baker, to talk about his investigations. He is one of 3 law enforcement officers in the state who truly focuses on human trafficking cases. We'll also hear from legal experts. I heard you talking about lawyers earlier, but they are good
You didn't
sometimes.
hear that, really? Full disclosure, Kimberly is also a legal expert, right?
Yes, I'm also an attorney, so, we try and do good sometimes. We'll have people there from the Attorney General's office talking about the laws that are involved. We have the Homeland Security Special Agent Brad Bybee coming over the lunch hour, and lunch will be provided. He'll be talking about the federal work that they're doing regarding human trafficking. We'll also hear from Tony Plummer-Alvarez, and she'll speak about human trafficking on Native American reservations. And that's actually one of the bigger problems we see in Montana for different reasons. And then we'll hear about victim services that are available and how to respond in a trauma-informed way. So the learning objectives for that conference are basically to learn what human trafficking is, how to identify the red flags, and then how to appropriately respond.
Okay, now, Kimberly, we're up against a break, and I want to stay with you because the question I want to ask you, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there in Montana, and I remember when I interviewed about this almost a month ago, I asked you the same question. A lot of people are saying, human trafficking in Montana? What? I guess the question I would ask you, and you've done a lot of investigation into this, how prevalent is it here in our state and specifically right here in western Montana? So we'll ask that question. We have lines open. If you'd like to visit with Kimberly Dudik, we'll be right back. Okay, we are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Joining us on the phone, Kimberly Dudik. The Montana Anti-Human Trafficking Conference is coming up this weekend. Now, I asked you a question before the break, Kimberly. Let's talk about human trafficking in Montana, because a lot of folks are driving around listening to the show thinking, why Montana? So what's going on here that we need to pay special attention to?
Sure. Well, human trafficking occurs everywhere. It's unfortunately a really unnoticed crime and misunderstood. People will frequently not know what they're looking at with human trafficking, or they confuse it with prostitution. And the difference between human trafficking and prostitution is that with prostitution, you have a willing participant. But with human trafficking, with the sex trafficking, it's when a person is forced to engage in commercial sex acts through forced fraud or coercion against their will.
So it's almost like slavery then.
It is. It's a modern-day slavery. And then there's also labor trafficking, where people will be forced to work, provide services, and either not get paid, or they're subjected to horrid working conditions that they cannot get out of. And we do see it in our state. You might see a farmer who has 3 people whose immigration documentation, green cards he has, and he's making them work for him. Or you might see in our hotels around here in Missoula, you see sex trafficking occurring. It's advertised on Backpage.com, and you see it happening. So our detectives and our law enforcement has become more aware of it, and we're seeing increased cases being reported that doubled since 2014, since the time that our law enforcement and patrol has been more trained in the issue and how to recognize it.
Well, it's doubled since 2014. Can you give us some kind of numbers as to how much it's doubled from? I mean, how many cases are we talking about?
Well, I can give you rough numbers. It's difficult because we don't have everything reported, and so there is no real database that you can go to see how many human trafficking cases there are in Montana. But we do have, there's an organization called the Polaris Project, and they have a hotline that they keep track of the states, how many calls they have, and how many human trafficking victims they think might be calling. And in 2015, we had 150 calls from Montana that appeared to be human trafficking victims. But then as far as prosecution goes, I mean, that's really where we see numbers. And we've had, that'd be the doubling in our state. And, gosh, I would say maybe 10 prosecutions for that. But we're looking at things that are charged as human trafficking. Some of them may not be. They are still charged frequently as aggravated prostitution. And that's where we're having a problem tracking the numbers. So I don't have firm numbers to give you, but in speaking with the law enforcement, they have said that they have had a lot more investigations and calls about this because now people know what to look for.
In the past, we've spoken with some law enforcement specialists on this issue, and they mentioned to us that a lot of these prostitution groups will kind of do like a vehicle tour. They'll take someone against their will through various towns on a circuit, and they'll go through, for example, maybe they'll go from Spokane through Missoula and then back again. I was wondering if, because of Missoula's location on I-90 and also with the connection down through Idaho, if you wanted to head south that way, do we end up being kind of a hot spot for this?
We do, unfortunately, and you've actually hit on one of the key reasons for that. It's because of our proximity to I-90. And you do see the exact circuit you're talking about. You have people trafficked from Missoula. They might go to Bozeman. They'll go over to Billings. And then they'll just come back around through Missoula again, end up over in Spokane. And you can actually track it. If you look at Backpage.com, you can see the same person advertising escort services or dating services from town to town where they move every few days. And so it's hard to actually get these people arrested because they aren't here that long.
Why isn't that page shut down? Because I keep hearing about Backpage this and
Right.
Backpage that. I mean, I realize it's free speech and everything, but if they're promoting prostitution, why can't they just be shut down?
Well, I'd like to shut them down. People have tried in different states, and there are some freedom of speech issues.
Wow.
There's also some regulations federally about the Internet. And so state legislators have to be creative about how they try and regulate it.
It's a squishy banana problem, too, though. Once you try to get it out of the skin of where it is now, it goes somewhere else.
That's right. They would just have another page. So we have to figure out, instead of just shutting down Backpage, which I would like to do, we have to figure out how to make our laws so that they can't just advertise sex and under the guise of something else. And there are some promising legislation that I'm actually going to be pursuing this next session about requiring Backpage to verify the identity thoroughly of the people who are posting on there. And so hopefully that will stop some of the ads that we see. That's what other states have done, and it hasn't been found to be unconstitutional yet.
Would that affect the Missoulian comment section as well?
I love the Missoulian comment section. I love free speech, and everyone should have their say. I wish they were nicer about it sometimes.
I guess Bob has a question.
Kimberly, when we come back from the break, I want to ask you about, you mentioned something early in terms of there's a difference in terms of like prostitution and trafficking, which I want some clarification on, and also to discuss the coordination of various organizations in tracking this. So when we come back from the break, I'll have you address that, please.
Okay, stay with us. So, by the way, we have 3 lines open. If you'd like to visit with Kimberly Dudik, maybe you have a question or a comment about human trafficking here in Montana, we'd love to hear from you. Our phone lines are open at 721-1290. Hey, thanks for joining us here on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number of the drummer Bob over there.
Hey, it brings me back to my roots there.
It's okay. John King is joining us here. Joining us on the phone, Kim Dudik, who is with the Montana Anti-Human Trafficking Conference, which is coming up this weekend. And we do have, let's get to the phone and say good morning to Chuck. Chuck, you're on. Hi, what's on your mind?
Well, this is all byproduct of no jobs. 95 million unemployed people, open borders. There's no solution except for jobs and a strong economy. We chose to give our jobs away around the world, and people with a low education level are looking for any way to earn a living, and a lot of them get abused.
Well, Chuck, I guess I got to... I mean, even if someone was able to make a living, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to make more money on a black market deal.
And when the economy was booming, I assure you that this type of behavior was maybe even more prevalent because people had more money to spend.
Well, I don't quite agree with you. I think these are desperate people in desperate times, and you're partially right, but you're also partially wrong.
So we agree to disagree.
Thanks, Chuck. I think what may be a little bit confusing here is, Kimberly, what you're talking about is primarily people who are forced into this kind of activity, basically with little or no pay at all, because they're being forced, right?
That's correct, and I think that we're talking about a $32 billion industry annually in the world, and there are 27 million people who are victims of human trafficking. In the United States alone, we're looking at a $5.9 billion industry of people being forced to work or to engage in sex acts against their will. And we're not talking about people who are just looking for a job. The typical human trafficking victim when it comes to sex trafficking is a 12 to 14-year-old girl. So while that they are more vulnerable if they are in the foster care system or they come from a unstable family home, it makes them more vulnerable to traffickers. But it doesn't just mean that we're looking for jobs. I mean, these are people who are victimized. And when they get into the sex industry like that, only 2% of them ever get out.
Right.
So we were talking about how do people get involved in prostitution. I mean, this is a pipeline to that. And
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kimberly. My apologies.
No, I was just going to say that we have approximately over 300,000 children sexually trafficked in the United States every year. So this is a problem. It's not just adults looking to make money, but it's people being forced into this. And any child, anybody under 18 who's forced to engage in a sex act, it's called prostitution, it's not prostitution, it's human trafficking because they can't consent to selling their bodies. And so it is human trafficking. And we're looking at not just stopping the act from occurring, but we want to go after the traffickers who are targeting victims and also the Johns, the people who are purchasing sex. We have to go after the demand because if there wasn't a demand for this market, like anything else, it would go away. So that's what our laws have tried to do in Montana.
For the record, they're not all named John. There's Peters and Bob's involved, I'm sure.
Isn't why they call it the world's oldest profession anyway? But go ahead, Bob.
So, Kimberly, there's two parts to this. You're talking about who the victims are. Give us some examples of who the organizers and traffickers are. And you mentioned something that came out in a conference that was here a couple of years ago, the difficulty of getting these young girls or boys out of this situation once interdiction takes place. What then lacks in terms of the support systems that we need to be able to move them out of this as opposed to going back?
Well, the hard thing to move them out of it is sometimes they don't see themselves as a victim. The typical human trafficking situation is not necessarily somebody being stuffed in a car and forced, to go to another place and then engage in sex acts. It's a courting where it's like they are grooming their victim.
But who's doing the courting? That's what I want to know. You're talking about them, but who are them?
Well, unfortunately, those are people living among us. They're the people who have just chosen to engage in criminal activity. They're people who think it's okay to target young individuals and engage in sexual relations with them and then make them sell their body for money. And so we're talking about who it is. It's typically people who are engaged in criminal behavior. The drug market, the illegal drug activities are a huge gateway to human trafficking also because they're all tied up together. So it's just basically criminal behavior and people in our society who are engaging in that.
Just this week, I did 2 stories about meth in Missoula. It was actually one story, but 2 cases. And I guess my question was, are you finding perhaps an increase of human trafficking riding on the tailwind of this meth epidemic we're experiencing?
I don't have any data to back that up, but it would make sense because it is related to drug use and is related to criminal behavior and activity, so that it would make sense that we could see a rise in that. You may also see that victims are sometimes given drugs and made to get addicted to drugs, and so then it makes it even harder to pull them out of the situation and have themselves see themselves as a victim because they're engaged in possibly using illegal substances, and they have some sort of romantic relationship with their the pimp, the person who's trafficking them. And so it's a very complicated issue, and it does take statewide effort, but also a national effort to have uniform policies as to how we treat this because it crosses state lines. And that's why we're going to be having Special Agent Brad Bybee from Homeland Security coming and talking about his work and what the Homeland Security is doing in this issue on Friday.
Okay.
So he'll be able to talk more globally about what the federal government is doing.
Okay, we're going to take a break, and Brenda is waiting to visit with you. We'll get to you, Brenda, in this 1 minute timeout. This is 60 seconds. We also have two other lines open at 721-1290. Joining us on the phone, Kimberly Dudik. We'll be right back. Talk back rolling right along here. Just a few minutes left in the program. Kimberly Dudik, kind enough to join us on very short notice. We appreciate that, Kimberly. And
I'm happy to do it.
You bet. Let's get Brenda on the line. Brenda, you are on with Kimberly Dudik. Hi.
Hi. I wanted to tell you about an experience I had with my granddaughter back a long way. She's 35 now, but when she was 15, she and her mother and a boyfriend were living in Boise, and they kicked her out of the house because she got caught skipping an assembly and going downtown instead. So her mother said she couldn't live there anymore if she wouldn't follow the rules. And so I heard about this 2 or 3 days later, went down, and I said, I'm finding her and I'm bringing her home. And they told me to mind my own business. And, of course, I didn't do that. But I actually found her at a bus station talking to a guy that was telling her he could get her modeling jobs. She was 15.
Yeah.
And that guy was threatening to me when I walked up and said, Emily, what on earth are you doing? And she said, well, I'm just about to get a modeling job, Grandma. And I said, well, no, you're not. You're just about to come home with me to Missoula, and that's the way it's going to be. But I just shudder to think what her life would have been like had I gotten there 15 minutes later.
Well, good for you, Grandma.
Yeah, you bet. I'm so happy it worked that way.
All right. Thanks, Brenda.
You bet.
All right. So we have David also on the line. David, you're on Talkback. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I just had kind of a random question, but I was wondering if they have any kind of bounties set up for situations like this where people can kind of report on other people in their circles to kind of expose the situation.
Well, I do know that Crime Stoppers can offer up to $1,000 in reward, and you can remain anonymous. So I'm not sure how much that extends out to what Kimberly's talking about.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for the call. All right. So Kimberly, are we on base with that, or how can someone, I guess, profit from, if you want, being an informer in a situation like this?
Well, I think that, you talked about it. Crime Stoppers may be a way to do it, but I would hope that as a community, we want to have a safe community, and so people will be compelled to possibly call 911 or to call who it may be Child Protective Services if they have concerns, and they will alert the authorities regardless of whether or not there is money involved. But if they see something where they think somebody's being victimized, I mean, we just heard about a 15-year-old girl who her life could have been ruined if she would have gone with that photographer who was he was grooming her and trying to get her involved in sex trafficking. That's the exact kind of situation we're talking about, and people need to just become more involved and aware in their community and look out for each other.
Now, to his point, David was really, I think, trying to ask a question about those that are already in the illegal community, trying to get, I guess you would call it whistleblowers or rats, to rat on themselves. Is there anything like that, do you know?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's whistleblower protection that would apply to that kind of a situation, but I think that they could be a confidential informant, mm-hmm. and that they could just call law enforcement and they can make either a confidential report or they could actually work with them but still try and remain anonymous.
Yeah, the way it works, David, is usually they get much lesser charges, if any. If they get charged at all, if they come out and rat out on the rest of the organization, they're able to avoid a lot of prosecution, is usually what it seems to happen. I wanted to ask you a really important question, though, Kimberly, before we get too far. I think it was last week I did a story about a man who was videoed going into a bathroom with a young girl, a shower. Now, it was in Missoula. He was from Missoula. He was doing a route from Missoula, I think, to Great Falls or Billings. Anyway, it might not seem like that sort of a weird behavior at first, but apparently he is being accused of rape in this case and of trafficking this young lady to many different places across Montana. What are some of the signs, things that people might want to watch out for, be careful or more wary about that occur in this evil industry?
Sure. So with sex trafficking, the hotel workers and people in the hospitality industry actually have a really good opportunity to possibly see and report human trafficking. If they see an older gentleman or even a woman with a really young child or young woman and something doesn't seem right to them, they rent 2 rooms and maybe there's a lot of high traffic into one of the rooms, like frequent visitors every hour, then that should raise some red flags. But also in talking with someone, and this is what anyone in the community could do, if you start talking with someone and they don't really have a good story about, their name, where they're from, why they're here, or who they're traveling with, then those things should possibly raise some red flags for you. And as far as labor trafficking goes, if you have workers who live with their employers or who don't really get paid, who possibly don't have their identifying documents, they don't have if they have a passport or whatever, they don't have those materials, and then they seem to be maybe undernourished in any of these situations, then those should be things that raise red flags for people.
Okay, let's try to get one more call in if we can. Mark, you're on with Kimberly Dudik. Quickly, go ahead.
Hello, Kimberly. My question is that lady that called earlier about a granddaughter. Since she's school age, she sounded like she didn't trust anyone in her school to go to.
Okay.
Okay.
I think he's trying to say that perhaps you need a social network or options for to catch things on that side of things for the young kids that fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so. We do need those.
We have exactly 1 minute. So give us the when and the where, and if there's a cost, and tell us more about the conference. It's coming up later this week.
Okay. So Friday at the University of Montana at 7:30, there's the Red Sand Project, and that is $10. It's just a fundraiser for the Montana Anti-Trafficking Project, who seeks to raise awareness of this issue in Montana. At 8:30 till 4:30, the conference starts at the UC North Ballroom, and that is free to the public. We encourage anyone to come. And then we have to finish the day, there's a 5K run walk around the university campus. It's the second Run for Freedom, and this is also just a fundraiser that costs $40 to participate in the event. And if cost is an issue for any of this, then they could also be sponsored by the Montana Anti-Trafficking Project.
Really quick, give us a phone number. We have 10 seconds.
Sure, a phone number? Sure, they could, if they have any questions, feel free to call me at 406-239-5771.
Right. Thanks so much.